if I've ever met a person who isn't afraid of clowns. Like, it's just flat out creepy to think that there are men out there who think it's normal to put on a bunch of obnoxious makeup and prance around at kids' parties. It's a red flag, and it was definitely a red flag for John Wayne Gacy. This guy used to make appearances at neighborhood get-togethers, charity events, and children's parties as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. But his cheerful, kid-friendly clown character was all a facade, because years later, John would be arrested for slaying 33 young boys between the ages of 14 and 21, most of which were found buried in a crawl space under his house. Yeah, this one's a pretty gruesome story, but I'll try to lighten the mood a bit with an apple pie. John Wayne Gacy was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. He lived with both of his parents and two sisters. Apparently, his dad was an alcoholic who had a short temper. And as the only son, John was under a lot of pressure from his dad to be a super manly man who loved hunting and fishing. But John never met those expectations because he always had more of a knack for cooking and baking with his mom. John was constantly beat by his father, called names, and was even told he would never be good enough in his father's eyes. What? Okay, I hate the fact that the kid's dad was so bent up about him liking to bake. Like, do you not like to eat cookies and pie? The first thing that raised brows about John happened when he was 13. His sister, Karen, found a pair of girls' underwear in a paper bag in his room. Karen thought it was weird, so she told her mom, who said John apparently had a fetish for this, because he had done that with her clothing before too. Why is the mom so casual about this? I would be hella skeeved out by that if I were her. When John was 17, he got in a huge fight with his dad over some car drama and ran away. Or actually, he drove away. John's parents hired an investigator and found out that their son was in Vegas working as a mortuary attendant. Okay, out of all of the jobs John could apply for, he ends up going with the one where you sit in a room with a bunch of corpses. That's a bit concerning. After his parents found him, John decided to go back to Chicago, but his family said he seemed a lot different after he returned. Yeah, I'm sure spending your days kicking back with deceased people will change a guy. Anyway, John moved back to Chicago, got a job managing a shoe store, and married one of his coworkers. They had 2 kids together and moved to Iowa. John's first reported assault happened in 1967 after he moved to Iowa. He lured a 15-year-old boy to his house and physically violated him. He also apparently tricked several other teenage boys into performing physical acts as scientific experiments and would sometimes pay them for the studies. That is so wrong in so many ways. Like, I don't even know what to say at this point other than this guy is sick in the worst way. John wasn't caught until the spring of 1968 when one of the boys told his dad what was going on. He was then arrested for sodomizing 2 teenage boys, but he claimed he was innocent. During this time, John was very politically active, so he said he must have been set up by his opponent. When John was in prison, all of the guards loved him. They said he was a model prisoner, and apparently he really was on his best behavior because he was released super early. He only ended up serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence, which is not even half of his sentence. And I'd understand him getting released early if he was in jail for theft or the possession of illegal substances or something, but for assaulting teenage boys? That's a no from me. And honestly, I want to say I'm shocked at this point, but after hearing quite a few awful crime stories, this seems to be a trend with the officials who determine these things. Alright, so after John's short stint in jail, he moved back to Chicago to live with his mom and sisters. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention his dad passed away when he was in jail, and it was from cancer. But John convinced himself he was the reason his dad kicked the bucket. He seriously thought he was such a letdown that his dad just decided to peace out. Seems like John is being a bit dramatic here because the doctors literally said it was cancer. After moving back to Chicago, John started his own construction company. He was also actively participating in politics and began hosting a lot of parties at his house where he'd dress up as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. Another one of his clown characters was named Patches. Whoa. Okay, I need to unpack this for a second. Construction, politics, parties, and clowns. And of all the names he could give his creepy clown personalities, he chooses Pogo and Patches? And why do you need two different characters? Well, apparently Pogo and Patches were a hit with the kids because John started getting hired to make appearances as these clowns at charity events, kids' parties, and other shindigs. I'm guessing this was before the majority of people thought clowns were creepy, which is crazy for me to think about. Like, was there seriously a time when people actually liked clowns? I got a clown-related story. Yeah, I watched It when I was a kid, and I never looked at clowns the same ever again. Enough clown talk. Let's get back to the story. So John ended up getting married a second time. His mom moved out of their house and his new wife moved in with her kids. But John was apparently living a double life because when his wife and kids weren't looking, he would prey on young men. John's wife, Carol, mentioned that he'd often leave the house at night telling her he had something to do or someone to meet up with. A lot of times, he would come home with young men that Carol never knew. He would bring them home in his car and take them to the garage. Okay, but how is Carol just letting this go on? Like, did she not ask him what was going on or who these people were? Well, one time when John wasn't there, Carol went to scope out the garage and found some questionable items like mirrors and chains. She also found random men's wallets, IDs, and explicit photos. Finally, Carol asked John what was going on, and he told her it was none of her business. Yeah, last time I checked, you guys are married, and it's definitely her business to know what's going on at her own house. Damn, this dude is shady. 3 years into her marriage with John, Carol filed for divorce and moved out. John then turned his focus to his construction company. And the super sketchy part about his company is he only hired young men. No! He claimed it was because they were cheaper to employ, but later we find out John had ulterior motives. In 1975, John had a weird encounter with one of his employees, Tony. John showed up at Tony's house unannounced, play wrestled him, and put him in handcuffs. Tony was freaked out, but ended up getting out of the handcuffs and shook off the whole thing. Well, until 2 weeks later when one of his co-workers, who was also a teenage boy, went missing. When Tony realized his co-worker hadn't been showing up for work, he asked John where he went. John claimed the boy called him and told him that he was moving to Puerto Rico, so he wouldn't be working for the construction company anymore. But around the same time, Tony noticed John's garage floor had just been redone. He asked John about the new concrete, who said he repaired the floor because it was cracked. That's a bit sus. A boy goes missing and the room where his creepy clown boss was known for having boys in just got new floors? Something must have gone down because who really cares that much about their garage floor? Well, the boy was eventually reported as missing, and his parents begged officers to investigate John, but they never did. In January of 1977, another teenage boy went missing in Chicago. Okay, what is going on here? This can't be a coincidence. It was a 19-year-old man who was also named John. So we'll call him John S. and our clown man John G. So John S. hadn't shown up for work 2 days in a row. One of those days was payday, which he never missed. I mean, I never miss a payday either. So if John S. wasn't there to get that dough, something must be wrong. His family was concerned, so they reported him as missing. Officials knew that John S. was on a date the night he disappeared. Later, they pieced together that the teenage boy was in the car with his date when he got pulled over by what he thought was a cop. But it was actually John G, aka Clown Man, pretending to be a cop. He drove an unmarked car with red lights on top and was later known for pulling young men over, telling them that they were out past curfew, and handcuffing them in the back seat of his car. But at the time, investigators didn't know any of this, so John S. was just reported as missing and it was left at that. In 1978, another teenage boy went missing in Chicago. Seriously, this is getting ridiculous. How did the police not know all of these were connected? And how did they not keep a closer eye on the scary clown man who only hired teenage boys and had a record of assaulting young men in the past? That seems like he'd be a pretty clear suspect. Okay, so this kid who went missing was a 15-year-old boy named Robert. He was talking to his boss about a remodeling project at the drugstore he worked at when John came up to him. John told Robert that his company hired teenage boys and paid them at least $5 an hour. This was almost double what he was currently making, so his ears perked up. When Robert's mom came to pick him up that night, he told her he was going to talk to some guy about a job opportunity and he'd be back in a few minutes. But he never returned. And if you haven't already guessed, the guy he went to talk to was John. After 15 minutes passed, Robert's mom started freaking out. She couldn't find him anywhere, so she drove to the police station and filed a missing persons report. She knew he was kidnapped by someone because he wouldn't just run away like that. Investigators were tipped off by Robert's boss that the boy was last seen talking to John. And once the officers looked up John in the system, they found his previous charge of sodomizing young men. OMG, how were they not aware of this before? Like, how did this dude fly under the radar for years without being pinpointed down as a creep? Okay, so officials were certain John had something to do with Robert's disappearance. They show up at his house and begin to ask John some questions about the boy. John claimed he had nothing to do with Robert's disappearance, but when they searched his house, things started to look really bad for John. Detectives found a panel on the floor that seemed a bit off, so they picked it up to reveal a trap door. Oh no, I am not liking where this is going. They opened the trap door and crawled down to check things out, but they didn't find Robert anywhere. Oop. False alarm. Even though they didn't find Robert, officials did find a handful of suspicious things in John's home. They found several police badges, a pistol, a syringe and needle, handcuffs, adult films, bottles of Valium and atropine, a bunch of driver's licenses that didn't belong to John, and the sketchiest of all, a high school class ring with the initials JS inside. If you've already forgotten, the teenage boy who went missing 1 year earlier was named John S. Investigators were able to identify the ring as that same John S.'s from the previous story. The investigators then called John S.'s family and found out the boy had been missing. This is when the officers started to freak. Everything was adding up, and John G., the clown man, became the leading suspect in John S. and Robert's disappearances. So officers needed to search his house again, but they had to request another warrant. In the meantime, they took turns parking outside of John G's house to keep watch. And John tried to schmooze them into thinking he was a great guy. He would invite them inside, buy them drinks, and would talk at length about his charitable work, including his whole clown act. Which I feel like by telling the cops you dress up as a clown for kids hurts your case more than it helps it, but whatever. Well, when one of the officers was inside the house, he went to the bathroom and reported the smell of a deceased body. With that officer's claim, the second search warrant was granted, and investigators went back to search John's house on December 21st. They went straight for the crawl space under the trapdoor because they knew there had to be something down there. I mean, why else would this lowlife have a trap door, especially with his history? Well, that day, officials uncovered the bodies of 3 young boys, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. John was immediately arrested and taken into custody. During his interrogations, John admitted to executing at least 33 young boys. He told officials that over 20 of them were buried under the crawl space in his house, and at least 5 of them were thrown into a nearby river. How is he gonna casually say he took the lives of 33 boys? And how was none of this discovered until now? They didn't think to investigate things way back when Tony noticed the newly paved garage after his co-worker disappeared? And to have that many bodies in a house for no one to notice until it gets to double digits is pretty damn disturbing. I'll spare you the details, but investigators continued to search John's house, and it was rough. They eventually found 26 bodies under the crawl space and 3 more in other parts of the house. One of the victims was identified as John S. and another as Tony's friend who went to Puerto Rico. But get this, his name was John too, which could just be a coincidence because it's a pretty common name, but I still think it's pretty freaky. Bye-bye! few of the other victims were recovered from a nearby river, but Robert still hasn't been found to this day. But investigators did find Robert's jacket in John's home, so they concluded he was one of John's many victims. In 1980, John went to trial for all 33 executions. During his trial, John claimed he had multiple personality disorder. He said he had 4 different characters: John the contractor, John the active politician, Pogo the clown, and a policeman who he called Bad Jack. He claimed Bad Jack was responsible for his crimes. Dude, let it go. There's no way you're getting out of this one. OMG. Well, after a 3-hour deliberation, the jury found John guilty on all 33 counts. At the time, this was the highest amount of convictions any person in the US had received. Okay, I know 3 hours is normally a short time for jurors to make their decision, but I feel like it would take me 3 seconds to determine this jerk is guilty. And finally, in 1994, John was executed by lethal injection. And thank God he was, because I am so tired of hearing about all of his horrendous acts. They're sickening. It's so ridiculous that he wasn't caught earlier or even kept in prison longer the first time. And my heart goes out to all of the families of his victims. I hope they're able to find some comfort in knowing this atrocious man is no longer alive. Well, now I know why clowns are considered creepy. And I need something to keep my mind off of this story. A slice of pie should do the trick. Stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.